few conflicts in the history of mankind have been as bloody and as loud as the Great War. It was the first truly global clash in which more than a dozen nations from each continent participated. As a stalemate took hold, thunderous artillery rained down on all sides. Verdun, the Somme, Tannenberg, Cambrai, and the Argonne were some of the fiercest battles and offensives that occurred between 1914 and 1918. During these 4 years, more than 10 million soldiers perished under the foot of the latest military innovations of the time as they faced off against the destructive fire rate of machine guns, unforgiving gas attacks, and barrages of shells. Europe's once beautiful grasslands turned into the trenches of no man's land, full of mud, gunpowder, rats, and gigantic craters of artillery impacts. The cacophony of war was terrible. Bullets flying everywhere, machine guns firing, tanks rolling by, and artillery crashing down from the sky were part of everyday life in the trenches. However, it all changed on November 11th, 1918, when at 11 a.m., the Western Front battlefields went utterly silent. It was the signal that World War I had finally ended, and it was captured on audio tape. In the last days of the Great War, after the US finally decided to support the French and the British, the German Empire knew it was the time for a ceasefire. Europe was broken economically and physically. When contact was made between German and French officials, it was agreed that an armistice would be settled on November 11th, 1918, at the forest of the Compiègne. It was signed at 5:45 a.m. that day, but it would not be until 11 a.m. when an official ceasefire would be enforced across the Western Front's battlefields. Thanks to sound ranging techniques used in 1918 to detect the location of enemy positions from which cannons were firing, over 100 years after the conflict, it's possible to hear how the Great War's battlefields went completely silent at 11 a.m. the morning of November 11th, 1918. Commemorating the 100 years of the war's ending, the British Imperial War Museum partnered with London acoustics firm Coda to Coda to reproduce the Armistice's soundscape. To replicate the sound of a World War I battlefield, Coda to Coda used authentic sound-ranging graphic records from the last moments of war, given to them by the Imperial Museum. It consisted of using 6 primitive microphones in a curve behind the frontline trenches. The system worked like a seismometer and the way it records an earthquake. These mics were embedded in barrels of oil firmly dug into the ground and connected by wire to a machine with 6 buttons. When each microphone detected a noise, the wire would move and register the movements in a piece of photographic film. Because light travels faster than sound, the soldier in charge of the machine would push the button each time he saw the flash of enemy artillery, triggering the photographic film's registration. Once that was done, soldiers could estimate the firing distance and triangulate enemy artillery positions on a map and adjust their own artillery to fire in that position. Using those photographic films, Coda to Coda created a 1-minute-long recording of the Great War's last sounds. Will Worsley, director and principal composer at Coda to Coda, said, quote, "This document from the Imperial War Museum's collections gives us a great insight into how intense and chaotic the barrage of gunfire must have been for those fighting on the Western Front. The soundscape is immersive. An artillery barrage is heard at a long distance. Then scattered rifle fire comes in, accompanied by the impact of shells hitting the mud and the short burst of machine gun fire. After a few seconds, the intensity of combat begins to die down, with isolated rifle shots and one artillery barrage hitting a target far, far away. Then it all goes quiet. Utterly quiet. It truly feels that after a minute of intense cacophony, the war has indeed ended."